County Public School System, considered one of the finest educational environments in the entire state of Alabama, has a history beginning in the latter part of the 18th century, when, as records indicate, Alabama's first public schoolhouse was built in the North Baldwin County community of Tensas in 1799. And at that time, nearly 10 years prior to Baldwin being organized as a county, the area remained geographically expanse. Agriculture served as king, and family farms dotted every section of the county. And in this era of extremely limited highway systems, individual communities built their own respective public schoolhouses, with the Board of Education supplying teachers to provide instruction. In the early part of the 20th century, the Baldwin County Public School System boasted over 80 separate school districts, each with their own individual public schoolhouse. And as time progressed, marked with improvements in transportation and engineering, numerous school districts were consolidated into nearby areas, leaving us today with very few of the original and historic public schoolhouses which distinguished Baldwin County, beginning in 1799, as the birthplace of Alabama's first public schoolhouse. This documentary, commissioned by the Honorable County Commissioners of Baldwin County and honorable members of the Baldwin County Board of Education, seeks to illuminate these few remaining and historic original public schoolhouses in an effort to pay tribute to one of the finest public school systems in Alabama. Education in the South Baldwin County community of Orange Beach has a rich history, beginning with the first school in the area, which was a one-room schoolhouse that operated from 1910 to 1914. This building has become a National Historic Site and is now the Indian and Sea Museum of Orange Beach. The students of Orange Beach attended school in Foley and then Gulf Shores from 1914 until a new elementary school was constructed in 1997.
Today, if you go to the city complex in Orange Beach, where the city hall is, you will just be aghast and taken by the beautiful building that's there on that campus. At first look, it looks like a church, and many people mistake it for a church, but actually the building there is the original school that served Orange Beach community, built in 1910. Built by the Callaways and other families that lived in that area. It served those children until it was consolidated and the children started going to Foley High School, Foley School in the 1920s. The building itself, a one-room wooden building with a steep roof line and a gorgeous belfry, served those children there, seen in an early photograph in the 1910 era. After the building was no longer used as a school, the church used it, and it was maintained there on the bayfront for many years and served as for many different purposes there in Orange Beach, until the city agreed to use it as their city museum. And it was moved to the city complex and beautifully, painstakingly restored to almost its original condition. The front door, many people who are alumni say that the front door was actually in the back at that time and that the building is reversed now, but you can still see the original woodwork, the walls, and the many of the artifacts that are actually there in the museum were from the original teachers that were there. And the residents there tell us that some of their families, of course, descended from these teachers, because as Mr. Callaway would go and get new teachers to come and be the teachers there in their community school, they would end up marrying one of those good-looking Callaway boys. And that was, jokingly in the community, that's one of the reasons that they decided to consolidate the school with Foley. The community there has just such an outstanding heritage of living and sustenance living from the land. It amazes many people to realize there was not even electricity in this area until the 1960s. And many, many people who are living there now can remember when the bridge was built and how hard it was to get from the island over into Foley because of the drawbridge being up and down, and how hard it was to get a bridge tender there. There were other schools in the Pleasure Island area. There was the Gulf Shores. There was a school at Gulf Shores. There was one at Fort Morgan for a while. There was a Navy Cove school, and there was the Shell Bank School that has many wonderful stories. The only preserved building we have on the island, however, is this magnificent example of a community coming together to build a school, going out, finding the teachers, bringing the teachers in. The teachers were paid by the county for maybe 2 months or 3 months of the year, and the local community hired the teacher many times to teach longer than that. We are so fortunate to have a community that's cared enough about not only the building, but the heritage and the artifacts that were used, that you can visit today and share in this beautiful treasure that we have, thanks to this wonderful group of people who have maintained this for the future.
Beach Indian Sea Museum, which was the first school in Orange Beach, and now it's the first museum in Orange Beach. It was built in 1910 by James Calloway and some of the other Walker boys, just like Earl was saying. Everybody jumped in to build it. And my mother finished her last year in here as school, and she said she can remember going the 4 months out of the year of either freezing your buns off or burning them up in here, because it had no air conditioning, no fans. There was no window screens on the windows. The bugs came in, and it was hard to keep teachers here because every time a teacher came, they would have to be single, and they would end up marrying one of those Calloway boys because they were so good looking, and great-grandpa Calloway would have to go back and try to find another teacher, and after 4, he gave up. So then Uncle Amon went to Louisiana, bought the school bus, and brought it back, and they bused the kids to school. Everybody took turns busing them to Foley. And it was a long ride, and Mrs. Lauder, that was a Calloway, she was my school bus driver. I didn't have the pleasure of going to school here. I had to go to Foley. And she was my bus driver the whole time I went to school. She was wonderful. The boys would get in fights on the bus, and she'd put one off up by the canal and one down by Clisby Swamp. And she'd say, if y'all want to fight, you meet up with each other and you can fight all you want, but you ain't fighting on my school bus. And that's just the way it was. She wore the pants on the bus. And my mom and them, my great-grandfather came here in 1800. It was Lemuel Sr. Walker. And he married a full-blooded Creek Indian that lived at Bear Point. So imagine Lemuel Jr. probably went to school here, probably the last of his, whenever they built the school in 1910. He probably went like a couple of years here, probably. I'm not sure because they were all passed away before I was born, so I really don't know. And it's just a great place, and we, like, everybody was saying, you grow up down here, you have Christmas parties here, you have all the fishermen had their meetings here. Dorothy's mother and all the ladies had their home demonstration in here. Everybody just met here for everything. And then Dorothy taught Sunday school in here. And my brothers and sisters went to Sunday school in here every Sunday, because my mother was Baptist and my daddy was Presbyterian. So we got drugged back and forth. And it was just a great place to grow up. It was just, everybody down here was kin to each other pretty much. You didn't have to lock anything up. You never had to worry about nobody bothering anything. And my grandmother and my Aunt Emma, she delivered all the babies on the island. And Uncle Amon, like they were saying, he did a lot of the doctoring for the animals and everything else. And my mom had all 4 of her babies down here on the island. but me, and I was born over the top of Holmes's Hospital in Foley. My grandma said, Mama was 41, and she said, I'm not delivering this baby, you're going to Foley. Only one of my mother's children out of 5 that had to be born in a hospital. And they just dug the canal, hadn't long been dug, and they had a swing bridge. And they had a hard time keeping someone in the bridge to run it. And it was at night, and when my daddy came in from fishing, my mom had already been in labor, and she said, I think we need to go to the hospital, because Grandma's not going to deliver this baby. So Daddy puts her in the car, and they take off up of that dirt road, because the canal was dirt. And they get up there, and Daddy's praying all the way up there, please, please let that bridge be shut and somebody be in it, because I'm not delivering no baby. And so the bridge was shut, and Daddy got me to the hospital. And of course, I was born before Dr. Holmes made it to the hospital. His wife was his nurse, and she delivered me. And so that worked out pretty good. And my daddy was a fisherman. He was born here. His daddy before him was born here. And my great-grandfather that was lineal that married the Indian in 1800s here, he came from Scott. He was the Scotchman. So I'm Scotch, Irish, and Indian. And it's just, you know, I feel like I'm blessed. I got the best of both worlds. I grew up here when Orange Beach was a quiet little fishing community and everybody knew everyone. And you could walk down the road to Bear Point and you might see 2 cars if you're lucky. So if you were hitchhiking, you were out of luck. You were doing more walking. And then I've seen it grow into this massive city. And I never thought I'd be working down here, because if you didn't fish, you didn't work down here. So, you know, it was just a great place to grow up. And my mom's told me lots of stories, because Uncle Emil used to ride sentry down at Fort Morgan. And every now and then, Grandma and her and Aunt Eve and Uncle Al would get in their horse and wagon, and they'd head for the fort. And it would take them all day from the hotel to get to the fort. And they would spend the night there, and Mama and Grandma would sew the uniforms for the soldiers. And they would, my grandma also made clothes and stuff, like, so if they needed underwear or anything they needed, she would make it for them. So when they would get there, if they didn't have a fish fry going, in the summer, the rattlesnakes were really bad in Fort Morgan. So all the soldiers would go out, and they called it Rattlesnake Day, and they would all kill rattlers, and they'd bring them back and clean them, and my grandma, my mom, and her sister, and they would cook them. And some of the cooks that was with the soldiers, and they would eat rattlesnake, and it was called Rattlesnake Day. And they had it like every July down at Fort Morgan, until Uncle Emil didn't have to go down there anymore. And that was a sad day for them, I think, when they didn't have to go down there. Of course, Mama said it was a long ride down there on a wagon with no springs to get there. And it was hot. And so they lived at the hotel, and they worked down there and took care of people, and she grew up there. And like I was telling the other day, they're having pig problems down here. Animals used to roam all over the island. And when you had a house down here, you had a fence around your yard to keep the animals out of your yard. Not to let them in, keep them in your yard, but to let them out. Because we had wild pigs, deers. There was just all kind of animals roaming around. And nobody down here had their cows penned in. They all were branded. The Walkers had theirs branded, and the Callaways brand theirs. So everybody's cows just went everywhere. So Mom said you just fenced your yard in to keep everybody out. And this school had lattice under it when they built it to keep the hogs from getting underneath of it where it was cool, because it was built on round pine pilings back in those days. And the hogs would root up under there to get cold, and sometimes they would literally knock the foundation out from under the buildings. So they would put lattice up to keep the hogs out from this building, because it didn't have a fence around it. But Mama said you'd never surprised. Some days you go, there'd be chickens down here at the school. Some days there'd be a couple of goats following the kids to school. Dogs always around going to school. And she said sometimes you could hear the hogs underneath the building if they would get up under there. And they'd be rooting around. And we have 2 tusks that were broke off in some of the wooden pillars under this building when they moved it from down at Swarns. And we actually have 2 of those that was stuck into the pilings where they were rooting and got them hung and broke off. So I could just tell you stories and stories about this place, but there's just, you know, this place was just a great place. It just always has been, you know, and the Callaways and the Walkers, we always got along, and like I said, if anybody needed, if a hurricane came, you didn't know it was coming because you didn't have electricity, you didn't have water. Even when I grew up, we had electricity when I was growing up, but we didn't have phones until John Snooks put in phones down here, and then they were party lines. And so then you could pick up a phone and talk to every one of your relatives. It was great. We'd have like 50-way conversations going on the telephones, you know, because we had party lines. It was wonderful. And it was just a good place to grow up. And, you know, and us kids just would go in the swamps. We'd be down at the bay waiting for our daddies to come in from fishing so we could make a quarter maybe cleaning the boats up and stuff. And it was just a good place to be. It was a good place to grow up. My dad mullet fished and oystered in the wintertime, and then he charter boat fished in the summertime, and sometimes snapper fished. But when I was growing up, we did have the corner store. So my parents would like work all summer, and then we would charge our groceries all winter at the corner store. And then in the summer, Daddy would pay our grocery bill off. And we very rarely went to Foley. Very rarely, maybe once a month to buy flour and sugar or maybe something for the animals that they needed, but we hardly ever went to town. Because like she was saying, when one of the animals got sick, you called Uncle Amel. If he couldn't fix it, then it was in dire straits because he knew how to do pretty much everything. He delivered the calves and horses and things like that when mares and stuff would have problems. Mama said he was always right there to get things done. So they had a hard life growing up down here because they didn't have any conveniences. They grew up with outhouses. And even when I grew up down here, we had an outhouse. We didn't get plumbing in our house probably until 1960. So we were kind of way back in the times. And when I went to Foley School, all my friends wanted to come to my house because they thought the outhouse was the most neatest thing in the world, and I thought it was the most horrid thing. I wanted to go to Foley and spend the night with them because they had indoor plumbing. We took a bath behind the wood stove in the kitchen, and they thought that was just the greatest thing there ever was, and I'm like, God, you're nuts. I want to go to your house. But they all wanted to come to our house. And so I guess my dad and my family was probably the ones that didn't really want to get into the new time of everything. But when electricity did come, we definitely got electricity. My mama said that was it. She was getting a fan, so we had fans. We grew up with fans. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have the luxury of that, but, you know, we loved it, you know. We grew our own gardens. We grew our own animals, and we couldn't make pets of the ones that were going to be butchered. And all of the men got together like twice a year for butchering hogs and cows or the rabbits or whatever. They all got together. None of us kids were allowed to be around. We weren't allowed because you wouldn't eat it if you saw what happened to it. and it's changed a lot down here now, but it's a wonderful place, you know. And it was a wonderful time to grow up down here. I don't have any regrets, none. Wouldn't have changed anything. I met my husband down here. I knew him when he was 13 years old because his daddy fished for a living. And they moved down here from Georgia. And he was just a scrawny little boy. But he was a new kid, you know, he wasn't a relative. He was like, oh yes, you know, here we got a new one. But luckily, most of the kids that grew up down here were boys in my time. They were all, like all my cousins were boy children. So there wasn't like 3 girls my age. And I was like, Ricky's mine. So anyway, I've been married to him for 28 years now, and we're very happy. And so we're just kind of blessed just to be here. Still be here.
I have many fond memories of this old schoolhouse. Not as a student back when it was used as the Orange Beach School, but in later years, after my family moved to Orange Beach in 1949, everything seemed to center around the Orange Beach Baptist Church. And the schoolhouse was on the property that the Orange Beach Baptist Church was built on. So we had Sunday school classes in this school building. We had Halloween parties. We had Christmas parties. My mother and some other ladies formed a home demonstration club, and we also, they had meetings here in the schoolhouse. So I have many fond memories, and I was so glad that when they decided to move it and set it up here as a museum, because I'm definitely interested in history. Along with Mike Shipler and Bay Minette, we put together the story of Orange Beach, Alabama. Our life here, growing up in Orange Beach as a child, like 2 years, being 2 years old when we moved here, everything in this community centered around that church over there. So any parties that we would have, and I can remember the Halloween parties, we'd have a scavenger hunt, you bob for apples, just do lots of fun things. I also remember with Bible school, we used to play a little game called Annie Over, where you would throw the ball over this building, and whoever caught the ball on the other side would have to run around and get back to a certain base. And my brother and his friend James Huff were really involved in that day. And James ran into this other boy, and of course he almost bit his tongue in two. So, and of course blood was everywhere, and that ended our Annie Over. We couldn't play Annie Over anymore after that. But which I guess is the way it always is. When something happens, then you have to come back and redo the rules. But I do remember it had a wood stove in the end of it, I believe, and it was always a cozy place to come in for either your Sunday school class or whatever party that we had here.
I went to grammar school in Foley for a few years during the Depression years. And one of the times while lived in Foley, the Girl Scouts wanted to come camp at Orange Beach. And a man owned a cabin pretty close to where Snapper's Lounge is now, and he told us we could camp there, we could stay in the building or camp in the yard, and we could walk down to the water where Hudson's Marina was and go swimming. The first night we got in there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and set up our tents and got all set for a fun time. Went to bed in our tents, and about 9 o'clock the pigs came through the tents. And we scattered like you can't believe, and no one ever slept in a tent after that. We slept inside the building. And then I moved to Louisiana, and later on I married Ray Calloway, who I had gone to grammar school with. And we married in '45. And he brought me back to Orange Beach a time or two, and it was not like it is now. The roads were not paved, the electricity was bad, the water was bad. He finally got me to move here in 1947, and I lasted 30 days. Then I moved to Mobile, and after about 2 years later, I was expecting Earl, and I quit work, and we moved to Orange Beach. And I hated it with a passion, but now I love it. And that was in 1949 that I moved here. And little by little, things got better. One time we bought what was the Orange Beach Hotel and Cottages, and all of that was Calloway land at one time. From 161 to where the Baptist church is, from the swamp to the bay, all belonged to the Calloways. It was homesteaded by their great-grandfather. And some of the others will tell you more about the history of that. But where the Orange Beach Art Center is now was an old hotel. And we purchased that hotel in 54, I believe. In 1954. And we ran the cottages and fed meals to fishermen. And we thought we got a bargain. We did. We bought it for $10,000, and we stayed there for 8 years and sold it for $30,000 and thought we were millionaires. And everybody says, well, think what it'd be worth today. But, you know, that's the way life is. And Orange Beach got better as we got better water and all of that. But talking about this particular building, I can remember the home demonstration formed, and Margaret Childress Long knows a lot about that. But when they formed, we used this building for all our community affairs because we didn't have any other buildings. And so that, you know, we would decorate it and make do. And finally, the school board gave it to the Orange Beach Baptist Church, and they used it, and then the community used it, and then later on we were trying to sell the building. We couldn't sell it. We gave it to Marvin Robinson, who owned the cottages down there, M&R Lodge. And then after Orange Beach was incorporated, Marvin gave this building back to the city so they could make a museum out of it. And talking about school buses, I'm like Earl. I asked my husband one time, I said, if you got fish and you wanted to sell them, how did you do that? He said, we put them in a gunny sack and put them overboard, and that kept them cool. And the next morning, we tied them to the front end of the bus. And we went to Foley, and the driver, whoever in the family was driving, dropped them off at the fish house. And then they took the fish in and sold them and walked to school. And that same school bus in the afternoon, when it left school, stopped in downtown Foley, and everybody got out and went and got bread or milk or whatever the family needs. Because that was you didn't have a grocery store down here. So it worked real good. And that went on, I don't know when I think the Callaways quit driving it. The county took over and they bought a bus, and then some of the Callaways still drove the bus. Miss Eleanor Callaway Lauder drove the bus for 32 years.
When this schoolhouse was built in Orange Beach, the local community men built it. And I don't know exactly who all worked on it, with the exception, I know my grandfather, James Amel Callaway, and my great-uncle, Herman Callaway, worked on this building. And in fact, in this museum, we have an adze and we have a broadaxe that were actually used to build this building. And as I understand it, there was a law in Alabama then, if you had a certain amount of children, I don't know if it was 10 or 20, but it wasn't many. If you had a certain amount of children and you built the building, the state would provide an instructor. And so my uncle, James Callaway, he was the youngest kid in the community, I guess. And all his life, he moaned and complained about when he was 4 or 5 years old, he had to go to school to make the last body to get the 20 kids up or whatever. And he never forgot it. He always complained about it. And then when the school did close, Amel Callaway purchased this school bus, and that started a long tradition of the Callaways driving the school bus. And as the children would graduate from high school, the next oldest son or sister would have to do it. And eventually, as all the men went off to World War II, the girls started driving the bus. And I know we drove the bus for over 50 years. We were associated with that bus. A13, and that was our number. And just like Clifford says, anytime we got stuck, the boys would get out and push the bus in the wrong direction, or they'd pull a plug wire off. Nobody wanted to go to school. And our little bus, there was always something going on there. For one thing, you could only sit in the last 3 seats if you were a sophomore or up. And of course, like any school bus, the big kids beat the hell out of the little kids and terrorized them all the time. Tell you one thing I remember, having the aunt that drove the bus, of course, she could tell my daddy in a heartbeat when I got in trouble, so I got it double all the time. And if you tried to eat a piece of gum or a piece of candy on that bus, as soon as you went in your pocket, everybody was watching, everybody wanted some. Give me some, give me some. So I went to my grandmother's in Foley one day after school and picked a whole 2 pockets full of those little ornamental peppers that are yellow and orange and red. And of course, there was no water on the bus. And so I cleverly waited till we left town before I got the candy out, started playing with my peppers, and before long, of course, every kid on the bus wanted one. And well, in about 10 minutes, you had a whole bus load of screaming, raising hell kids crying and moaning and groaning with tears running down their cheeks. And I remember that for several reasons, especially after I got home. But I'll tell you something that was different about that bus. People would fish at night, get up in the morning, go to school. The young men in the neighborhood would take their fish on the bus, get off at the Foley Fish House, sell their fish, and then walk on to school. And also, I'm like Margaret, I remember a lot of good times in this building, the Christmas parties and the Easter hunt, and the Halloween party was always a big one down here. A lot of good memories here. A lot of nice people in this community that joined together to build this little school.
Well, I was born in Foley actually, but I've lived here all of my life. My great-grandfather was James Clifford Calloway, and my great-grandmother was Nancy Ellen Calloway, and they moved down here in the I think it was around 1860 something, and after they got married, they moved to Orange Beach. So they were one of the first families to live here, and they've lived here continuously, the Calloway family, ever since. They had, I think they had about 9 children, I'm not sure, but they all worked, some of them worked on the boat with my great-grandfather, and some of them worked at the house, growing the garden and all that. And my great-grandmother sort of oversaw the garden duties, and they always had food, and they had cows that they were supplied meat, and pigs that they had the pork and everything. And my great-grandfather had the James S. Morrill and the Nancy Ellen, and the Nancy Ellen was named for my great-grandmother, Nancy Ellen Calloway. I think they just called it LNC, but anyway, he built the LNC over around just east of where the buildings were that was part of the community, Orange Beach, where they had the post office and the store originally. And so anyway, they said one time that my grandmother, the snake crawled across in front of her, and she stood real still and then got the gun and killed him. I don't remember who told me that, but anyway, that was one of the things that happened. And when my grandfather and his brothers were young, they all used to play, I'd say all, several of them used to play musical instruments. I don't think they read music, but they played it by ear. And they would go down to the Shellbanks school or church, I don't know what it was, but anyway, it was probably the school because they played music there. And that's where my grandfather met my grandmother. My grandfather was married a girl named Molly Ewing, and that's where she was raised. Her grandfather was originally came from England and settled in Shellbanks. So we're pretty much related to most of the old-time families all along, the Calloways and the Nelsons and the Fulfords and the Ewings and all of them. So so we're pretty much connected to everybody. And even the Walkers come into the Callaway family. So when you have a small community like this, you end up marrying who's around. But anyway, they built the church. My great-grandfather, I think, is the one that gave the land for the school. And so that used to be part of the Callaway property, and he gave that for the school to be built. They used to have the school across the swamp, which I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's east of where the Baptist church is now, and a little closer to the water. And the schoolhouse was originally there, but it was just a house that they used for the school. And I can't tell you a whole lot about it, but they had school in this house, and that's where it started. And my dad went to school there when he first started school. He was at that school, he and his sisters, and they ended up having to go to Foley, and it was a pretty long ride. Now, Earl was talking about bus 13. That's the bus that I rode when I was young. The other bus, I don't know if it had a number even, but because it was a privately owned bus. But bus 13 was a county bus, and we had to go. They were building while we were going. They were building this 180, which is now Canal Road. They were building that. And at times we had to go through the state park. That was when you could go all the way through the state park from Orange Beach. And we used to go through that winding road. And Eleanor, which was Eleanor Lauder, she was Eleanor Callaway Lauder, and she would go around those curves. And I can remember her blowing that horn, letting everybody know that there was somebody coming, because they were sharp curves that you had to go around, and she was watching out for the kids. And there used to be I know we used to sing a lot. I think it probably got on her nerves a lot, but the whole bus would start singing songs, and songs of that time anyway. And so I know it. Well, that's like the school, that's like the little heater that used to be in. It used to be up, the door was up at that end, and there was a little heater, and it was sort of like that when they had this. They didn't have heat in here. As a matter of fact, they didn't get electricity in Orange Beach until, I think it was 1937, around that time anyway. And my uncle was telling me that one time my grandfather had bought some cable, and he was putting electricity in his house. And my uncle was an electrician, and he came down and he realized that my grandfather had bought telephone cable. And he said, I was scared to death he was going to burn the house down. So he went and got some electrical cable, and he helped my grandfather install the electricity into his house. But back then, you didn't have things. I can remember seeing my grandfather, he would need a gasket, and he would get the stuff to make the gasket out of. He would get that, and he had his pattern for the gasket, and he would cut it out with his pocket knife. They always carried a pocket knife back then, and if you got a sticker in your finger or anything like that, they would take it out with that pocket knife. But anyway, one of the things that he did, he used to go fishing with a net all the time, and he would work on his net. Well, they have back in here, they have the needles where they would work on the nets, fix the nets, and he had fixed a thing that he could take the twine off of the roll, and he would wrap it around. And this thing that he had, was on it was a nail through it where it would spin around. So as he wound his needle up with the twine, he didn't have to worry about it. It stayed, it stayed just right, and it would just spin around and unwind. So that made it a lot easier for him. But he did that, he figured that out himself. And that was the way they did just about everything. They didn't go to the store every time. They would just do the things that they needed to do. And he was telling me one time when he was a young boy that they had a man working for him at his mother's house, and he had a pocket knife, and I don't remember what he was doing, but he cut his hand real bad. And the man went upstairs in the attic and got cobwebs and came down and wrapped those cobwebs around that wound. And he still had the scar, but it stopped the bleeding. I mean, when he would show us, we weren't supposed to play with sharp objects, and he would show us what happened to him when he was a young man. And he had a big old scar there, and that's what happened. And so I guess the man probably saved his life, maybe. And they would, just like one of his nieces one time got bitten by a snake, and he had some ammonia, and he capped that ammonia over that snake bite, and it helped to pull that poison out of where she was bit by the snake. I don't remember where she was bitten, but anyway, they were able to do things like that. They knew what to do to take care of it. And James Clifford Calloway, when he was young, and I can't tell you a whole lot about it, but he took care of the dental work. He would pull teeth for you, and he also, from what I understand, people in Pensacola would come over here to get him. They would take him over to their house in Pensacola to take care of their cattle, because he would bleed the cattle and take care of them. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but he was pretty much a doctor, I guess, and a vet, because they would do things like that back then. They didn't run to the doctor for everything, but he knew how to take care of it.
I'm married to Clifford Calloway, and he has related this story to me many times. It seems that his grandfather would get his crews from Mobile, and they would come to Orange Beach, and Grandmother Calloway set such a good table that they would just stay. And this one particular Dutchman, Uncle Henry Harms, stayed and married one of Mr. Calloway's sisters. And they had an awful lot of children. And the children just almost drove him crazy. So on Sunday afternoon one day in the summer, he walked out from the gallery, they called it, where all the family sat, turned and said, "Kupai, everybody," and he pulled out a pistol and shot himself. Well, he didn't die. They put him on we call it the Orange Beach Ambulance Service. They put him on a door on a wheelbarrow, and they took him to the LNC. And of course, LNC was a sailing schooner. They had to wait for the winds to be all right to get out the pass and go up the bay to Mobile, and they took him to the hospital. And the doctor said that they could not remove the bullet. It was too close to the brain. So they brought him back home. And he kind of survived that and went back to working with his father-in-law on the boat. But he always complained about, "Oh, how my head hurts so badly. I wish somebody could get this bullet out." So one day Clifford's dad, Herman Calloway, said, "Well, Henry, I'll take that bullet out." And he got out his pocket knife and he called it his forceps, but he called them faucets. And he took the bullet out. And Uncle Henry lived. And he didn't have any more headaches, and I think that's one of the funniest stories I ever heard. But he actually operated on him right there on the boat with a pocket knife and some forceps.
paper here that this canal was dredged September the 26th, 1932. And there's going to be 16 miles of it into Mobile Bay. And I didn't go to school here. I went to Foley School just after this closed, and my 3 older brothers went to school here. And when I got my charter boat license to fish snappers out in the ocean when I was 16 years old. My grandfather had 2 sailing boats, the L&C and the Merle, and they built the L&C right across the bay from where the old hotel was. And I asked my dad, I said, why did they do that across the bay? And he said, because it was too doggone cold, that north wind blowing, and so they had a little break with the trees over there. And one of my brothers, just older than me, was in the Navy, and he was a deep sea diver for the Navy during the war. And another one was in the Merchant Marine, and gosh, he went everywhere. And another brother was a commander in the Navy, and all of us was in New Guinea at the same time. There's 4 of us in New Guinea at the same time. And my dad was the first charter boat fisherman out of Orange Beach. And the way he found out where the Dutch bank was in Pensacola. My other grandfather knew a snapper fisherman out of Pensacola, and he introduced him to him, and he told my dad where that snapper bank was, and what he would do, he'd come out of the pass, and on the end of the island, it was a old dead tree, been dead for years, but it was tall. And he would get that in line with 2 sand dunes on the Gulf Beach. That's before the bulldozers pushed them all down. And he'd go straight out until he got to the snapper bank, 6 miles. And if he missed the snapper banks, he'd start sounding until he found it. But he always left a glass jar, a gallon glass jar on there. And most of the time when he'd get to the snapper banks, he'd look and there glass jars right there. And he fished that for a long time before anybody ever tried it. But when the fishing would get bad, and no mackerel in the Gulf, so he'd ask them if they wanted to go to the snapper banks, and they said sure. So he'd go out there and come back with a boatload. I mean, every time he'd have them all over the deck, and after the fish box would load it up. And so we drove the school bus. The first one was a 1929 Chevrolet. It belonged to Uncle Emil, and he bought the bus outright at that time. And so all my brothers drove that school bus anytime that they needed us, and I drove it, Ray drove it, Eleanor drove it, Brownie drove it, Lois drove it, everybody. And so we got to school, and most of the time we went down the Roscoe Road, down all dirt roads, and a lot of times we get stuck when one of my cousins would be driving it, the lady, and she'd say, well, you big boys get out and try to push. And so we didn't want to go to school anyway, and we'd pull back on it. And we'd stay stuck a long time. Well, Uncle Emil owned the school bus outright, and on Saturday he would take the seats out of the school bus. It was a 1929 Chevrolet, and he'd haul hogs in it and haul it to the CC camp where they had all the slop and garbage and all that there, and that's what they fed the hogs on. We trained, Ray Walker and Ray Calloway and myself trained for the Merchant Marine, which we didn't need any training because we knew how to read a compass, to steer a ship and everything else. But we went to the school And we'd have a lifeboat race every Sunday, and it might have to be 25 boats out there, and lifeboats, and some of them had instructors on it and running that thing, and we would row and toss our oars straight in the air and coast, because we'd get so far ahead of them, all of them, and most of them was instructors, and they didn't like us, but we cut our teeth on those oars. And our Navy bombed us. It wasn't the Japanese Navy, but it was in New Guinea, and they bombed us, but we couldn't get mad at them because they saved our life in the bombing. And so we had to go to Australia to go on dry dock. We got to Australia, and they didn't have anything to put us on. The ship was too big, so we went down the coast and went around that Great Barrier Reef. That Great Barrier Reef is what saved Australia. The Japanese sunk all the boats trying to get over that coral, and went around there, and we picked up like it was short-handed for ships, and we picked up 600 troops in Brisbane, Australia, and we were leaking like a basket, and we went back to New Guinea with them, and then headed back to San Francisco, and we made it. And I stayed in the Merchant Marine for 14 and a half years. And the people want to go foreign. They keep wanting to go on a cruise or go foreign. I tell you what, the best place right there is right where we're standing, right in the United States. We got everything they don't have. In my last year, I joined the football team, and we never lost a game the whole season. We beat everybody. Everybody we played, we beat them, and beat them bad. And we even went out of the county and still beat them. And it was Joseph Calloway, Ray Calloway, Clifford Calloway, and David Calloway was on the first string. But anyway, I went in the Merchant Marine when the war started, and I stayed in it for 13 and a half years. And I got out of the Merchant Marine and went directly into the oil field as an electrician and stayed out there for 23 years. And when I retired, I came back to Foley, and I married a sweet lady from Louisiana, and her name is Mirth Calloway, and we're happy ever after. Doing all right.
Well, a lot of these books, these here, they're really old, are books that the kids actually used here when they went to school here, and a lot of them were even written before 1910, so they're pretty much crumbling. So we tried not to let people take them out, but they're really, really neat books. They really are. The kerosene lamp was one of 12 that was in this building. It's an original lamp. It's the only one that survived over the years, because it's the only thing they had to light this place with during school and church. And the bell was an original school bell. That was the first bell, and Uncle Emil carved that handle in the bell. I don't know exactly where the bell came from, but he built the handle. So that bell was here in 1910 when the school opened. This is Dorothy Orr Calloway. She was one of the teachers that teach down here for a while until she married one of those good-looking Calloway boys. And then she became a mother. And because they wouldn't let you teach if you were married. You had to be single. The vase is a crystal vase that Eleanor Lauder Calloway bought for the first teacher that was here. She saved her money and bought that vase for the teacher, and it always sat on the teacher's desk. And when Mrs. Lauder, she was my school bus driver, when she was cleaning out her house, she brought the vase up here and wanted to donate it to the museum because she said it was part of the school that belonged here. This picture was when the school was built, right after it was built in 1910. And she was one of the first teachers, the lady in the dark dress. And I don't know her name, I wished I did, but it's just been so long ago, and now everyone that's went to school here pretty much has passed away. But those were a lot of the children that lived here then, so you can see there wasn't very many. This was one of the first school buses that was purchased by Emil Callaway. When this school closed, the children were all bused to Foley on this bus, and all of the Callaway children had to learn to drive the bus because everybody took turns driving the kids to town. And it was a long, bumpy ride, but they all survived, and were all on that long ride to town. But this was the whole class that went to this school.